Welcome back, football fanatics. It's College Football with Sam, and I want to discuss with you who I believe will be the 35 best teams in America for the 2025 season. Not entering the 2025 season. That will be a whole different video, a whole different list for the 2025 season. So when it's all said and done, when you can factor in all the game results, the playoffs, the bowl games even, to the best of your ability, these will be the 35 best teams in America. Very hard to gauge that, I know, and this list is subject to change. But I'm going to explain some more of how this will work. At the bottom of the screen, you will see the team logo, their ranking placement, their 2024 record, their preseason SP Plus and returning production metrics from Bill Connolly, and you will also see their preseason win total. And I'll be talking about each team with some analysis, but also with brevity. Otherwise, this could be a 1, 2, 3 hour video for about 30 to 45 seconds, maybe even a minute for each team, just around there. That's the most I'll spend on each team. I just wanted to let you know of that because I won't be able to talk about all of the information that I display on each team's little card on your screen towards the bottom. And also, before we begin, please like the video to help us get into the algorithm. Comment your thoughts below to give me an idea of what you're thinking so that we can have a back and forth conversation and so that you can provide feedback. We love feedback here. I love feedback here on College Football with Sam. And commenting also helps us get into the algorithm too, especially liking, but commenting and watching as much of the video as you can, watching all the way through. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. That way you can get notified when we go live Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And also you'll get notified when I redo these rankings in July and in August, and when also I release ranking videos like this that are longer and more in-depth for each of the teams I talk about. We got some Big Ten predictions and Big Ten rankings coming up. Same with the SEC. Same with the other conferences, ACC and Big 12, at least the Power 4. And then same with the teams who I think can win it all. So hit the bell to get notified of those and check out the video description if you want to go the extra mile and support the channel in any other way. Let's start off, though, and kick this off by talking about Michigan State, who I have at number 35. I love the Michigan State Spartans because I think that they have a very underrated coaching staff. I think that Jonathan Smith is a top 15 head coach. I think that Brian Lindgren is a top 15 offensive coordinator. And I think that Joe Rossi is a top 25 defensive coordinator. I believe in Aiden Childs. I think that him and Dylan Raiola and Jaden Mayava and Damon Williams Jr. are some Big Ten QBs who had some ups and downs last year or who didn't start many games, and they're going to take pretty sizable, huge steps forward in 2025. Childs is one of those. I also love the addition of Matt Golban at center, Connor Moore at tackle. Jalen Thompson, I think, will be a breakout player at defensive end, and they're just deeper than they were last year. So I'm high on the Spartans overall. At 34th, we have the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Minnesota is a team under PJ Fleck that is fundamentally sound. They know how to develop players. They have a good culture. It's not for everyone, but it works. It's the Minnesota way. Row the boat. I have questions with them at quarterback. I have some pause with their offensive line. I love Darius Taylor and A.J. Turner, though. I think that could be the best running back duo in America, and they have really good depth there. And then you look at their wide receiver core, and I think that Logan Loya and Javon Tracy were good additions. And on defense, they're stacked. I think they have 3 good defensive tackles, the best being Devin Eastern. And then I love Coy Parrish, All-American caliber safety. They do have a new OC, not a new OC, a new defensive coordinator, Danny Collins, and I do have some questions about their staff overall. But sound culture. PJ Fleck, I think, is a sound head coach. I think this team will be competing potentially for a playoff spot and certainly to be ranked at the end of the year. At 33rd, we have the Iowa Hawkeyes. Iowa is, I think, much like Minnesota. They're bitter rivals, but they're consistent. They're fundamentally sound. They usually don't beat themselves. But in the new era of the Big Ten especially, and college football as a whole with super conferences, but especially the Big Ten, because the SEC East, as weak as it was still infinitely stronger than the Big Ten West. the abolition of the Big Ten West has really hurt a lot of these West teams, especially teams like Iowa and Minnesota, who didn't have the talent of Wisconsin or Nebraska, but had superior fundamental soundness and culture. With some changes that are being made in the super conferences, that's worn on Iowa, I think, a little bit. I expect them to take a step back from last year, but they have the best center in the Big Ten in Logan Jones. I love their offensive line with players like Jennings Dunker coming back, Bo Steffens, Addison Ostrenga at tight end. And I think their D-line with Ethan Hurkett, Max Llewellyn, and Aaron Graves is solid. Phil Parker's a stud at DC, and therefore I believe their defense will still be good, maybe great, but they lose a lot from there after having a subpar last season, and I question how high their ceiling is on offense, even with Mark Gronowski at QB, who I like. They'll take a step back. They'll probably lose more games than last year, especially with the tough schedule, but overall I still think Iowa will be a good team. At 32nd, we have South Carolina. Lenoris Sellers. Can say his name over and over and over again. I think he's the second best quarterback in America. It's him and Cade Klubnik. It's the Palmetto State. It's South Carolina. Those are where the two best QBs in America reside, and the Gamecocks have one of them in Sellers. I don't think they're going to be nearly as good as they were last year. Sellers should get better, but they still have questions along the offensive line. They have some questions at running back, and they're really relying on the portal to help them reload at linebacker and D tackle. I love Dylan Stewart, Ryan Thomas Jr., and then they have players in the secondary like DQ Smith, Jalen Kilgore, Judge Collier, Brandon Sissy, who I think will be good, especially DQ Smith. So defensively, they'll be solid, but take steps back. And then offensively, they're going to have to rely on Nick Harbor and some of those wide receivers to really break through, or some massive improvements to take place on the offensive line. So from a power ranking sense, I think they're going to take a sizable step back, but they'll be able to punch above their weight class if they get things organized and put together. I know they've been recruiting well, and Beamer is a good culture, but with all they lose, I think they're going to take some steps back, especially that you now have film on Sellers and he's not an unknown. At 31st, we have the Auburn Tigers. Auburn has been a disappointment under Hugh Freeze year after year after year. I don't like the Jackson Arnold addition. I do love their wide receiver core, though, with Eric Singleton Jr., Cam Coleman, Malcolm Simmons. It's only behind Clemson's and Ohio State's. Connor Liu could be the best center in football, and they have some good players at DB and Jay Crawford at corner and Caleb Harris at safety. I have reservations with Auburn because even though they're talented and they're recruiting rather well, they have continued over and over again to beat themselves, and that's not a coincidence because Hugh Freeze is the man, the myth, the legend who was able to beat Alabama nearly 3 times in a row, but then he would lose to the most inferior teams in the dumbest ways. He'd lose to teams he had no business losing to at Ole Miss, and it's remained that way at Auburn. So I'm not high on them overall to be a playoff contender, but I do think they'll go bowling, and Freeze will probably maintain job security for another year. At 30th, we have Kansas State. They return Avery Johnson. Sam Hecht is going to be at star at center. Austin Romaine is one of the better linebackers in America, best in the Big 12. And I think they're deep at edge, deep on defense overall. I think Joe Klanderman runs a good operation there on defense. The only question I have with Kansas State's what's their ceiling. I love the J.B. Nelson addition at guard. Underrated at Penn State, just wanted a full-time starting role, and Penn State's O-line was too deep. It's the deepest O-line in the country. I don't blame him for leaving. And he's at Kansas State. I think that was a wonderful addition. He might be one of their best players on their roster. Anyway, the team ceiling is what I question. I do not question the floor. I do not question the fact that they'll probably win 8-9 games again like they did last year. I love Chris Kleiman. I think he's a top 15 coach, if not top 10. But their ceiling and Johnson's consistency is something to pay attention to. At 29th, we have Ole Miss. The Ole Miss Rebels had a wonderful year last year. They were top 6 in power rankings. I would have ranked them easily as a top 10 team, for sure, last year, even with some of their terrible losses. You saw their ceiling against Georgia. You saw it against some other bad teams that they actually woke up against and played in, like Arkansas. They showed they were one of the best teams in America there, and against some of their inferior competition, and of course, Georgia. But I don't trust Lane Kiffin. You can't lose to Kentucky at home and claim to be even close to a top 10 head coach. If that's a one-off, maybe. I remember in 2008, Urban Meyer lost to a pretty mediocre Ole Miss team, I believe, won the national title in dominant fashion. But that was a one-off. We've seen this with Kiffin before, losing to teams you shouldn't lose to, or losing to all the big teams, or this year he finally wins a big game, but loses to Florida, an LSU team that wasn't top 25 in FPI, or maybe they were top 25 in FPI, but not the AP poll. 4 losses, some of them pretty bad, and then of course that Kentucky game. They are going to regress majorly with all they lose, because they lose as much as Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, and Georgia without the recruiting or developmental footprint or the superior staff to easily reload there. I love Austin Simmons and their wide receiver core, and I think that they have some great players on defense like Xavier Harris at D tackle, but they are going to regress for sure. Baylor at 28th. This is a fascinating team. I don't have the time to talk about win totals for every team, but I will say that their win total of 7.5, I pointed out because I think it's rather low. And I'll be doing this for some teams as we get further along the list that I'm high on that Vegas and power ratings in the preseason strongly disagree with. Hint, there's another Texas school in there, and it's not from the Big 12. So I look at Baylor, and I think that they bring back Sawyer Robertson and the OC Jake Spavital, which is a good move. I look at their O-line, and I think that Omar Abedoyan and Colton Price and Ryan Lengel, that makes up a great interior. They have one of the better running backs in America in Bryson Washington, and they have some good players on defense and overall in the roster who were backups and highly recruited players in the SEC and Big Ten that they're bringing in on their roster. So that upgrades their talent profile, and I like that move in the Big 12 where you don't have a lot of star talent from a high school perspective. It's a completely developmental league, not for the Power 4 schools like the G5 is, where it's a developmental league for the Power 4. The Big 12 is able to retain a lot of their developed players, but nonetheless, getting any talent you can provide you with an advantage. They return a lot. They just have questions with their coaching staff and how good their defense can be. At 27th, I have Illinois. Illinois. Many have them top 10, top 15, top 20 for sure. I'm not buying it. Not buying it at all. Did you know they weren't even top 40 in FPI to end the year? And that they won 5-6 close games, depending on how you look at the Michigan game, and they only lost a close game, maybe 2, depending on how you look at the Penn State game. It was pitiful. Like the team ceiling at times was pitiful. Like watch and look at the Purdue game. Some will say this is me hating in Illinois. I'm not. I would love for them to reach the playoffs. I'm rooting for it to happen. I think Bielema is a good coach. Altmaier's probably an All-American QB. And every single member of their secondary. I'm talking about Xavier Scott, Miles Scott. I'm talking about Matthew Bailey, Caleb Patterson, Torrey Cox Jr. I didn't even look at the All-Big Ten team, which I have all of them on in front of me, and I could pull those names out of my brain because they're all really, really good. Ball-hawking safeties, corners, nickels. The problem is their trenches. O-line was substandard last year. They're losing a lot in the D-line outside of Gabe Jacas. And I just question their ability to game control. And I don't think they're going to sneak up on people this year. So I have them improving in a power ranking sense, but I don't think they're going to win 10 games again. Looking at Wisconsin at 26th, I like the Badgers because I trust Luke Fickell. Their staff is not what Fickell had at Cincinnati, but it's still good. I love Mike Tressel as the defensive coordinator. And I think this roster matches up with what Wisconsin used to be. They're strong on the O-line, not quite as deep as they used to be, but still strong. They're much better on the D-line than they've ever been in the Fickell era. They have experience at linebacker. Players there didn't grade out well, but they have a lot of experience there, so a lot of potential to break out at the linebacker spot. Their safeties are good. Preston Zachman, Austin Brown, and Ricardo Holman and Nizir Forkarine make up a great cornerback duo. I also like Billy Edwards Jr. moving there. He had one of the worst O-lines in America, if not the worst, at Maryland, and now he has Wisconsin tackles protecting him, like Riley Melmon, for example, and center Jake Renfro and guard Joe Brunner. I like Wisconsin this year. Not in terms of win-loss record because the schedule sucks. It absolutely sucks. Play at Michigan, host Ohio State, play at Oregon, at Indiana, at Alabama. All 5 of those teams. All 5 of them. And then their easy games easy are against Iowa, Washington, Illinois, and Minnesota. But I think from a power rankings rating sense, they're going to improve dramatically. And I think they'll go bowling and win some games against quality teams. At 25th, we're entering our top 25 now. We have the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Coaching is a question here. Whether Joey McGuire can be a push or a plus when it comes to winning games on your schedule that you should beat, or teams with similar talent, or whether he's a minus and they continue to lose games where you think they have no business losing, or they don't have business winning in overtime against an FCS opponent. They don't. Now, they upgraded their talent roster tremendously. I think it's the most talented roster by a good chunk in the Big 12. They brought in Lee Hunter, Romello Height, David Bailey. They brought in Bryce Pollock, Howard Sampson, Quentin Joyner. All these players are on my second or first team all Big 12, and all of them were transfers, many of whom were from SEC, Big 10, ACC schools, and those conferences are superior to the Big 12. Like, they got starters from schools in superior conferences, or projected starters at the very minimum, to transfer to them. Or Lee Hunter, Big 12 D tackle, who was, pretty impressive overall. They overpaid for him, at least per Cover 3, who I listen to, and I advise you to as well. But honestly, if they win games, it's going to be worthwhile. The question's coaching, and I would also say quarterback. I don't think Morton at QB is anything special, but almost their entire roster outside of QB is special, and I think they upgraded at DC. This is the year. If they don't win the Big 12, or at least reach the Big 12 championship game this year, I would question Joey McGuire's future. It's certainly a Big 12 championship or bust year for Texas Tech. LSU is a playoff or bust team, so I guess they're in a similar position to Tech. I have them 24th, and I think they'll start the year much higher than this. I really do. I think that with the experience they brought in through the portal, with Garrett Nussmeier at QB, and the fact that their defensive staff is in year 2, they're going to start the year higher than a lot of the teams ahead of them. But this is not who I think will be the best teams in America entering the preseason. That's not this at all. I'm talking about the end of the year. What are you made of in November? What are you made of in December? We saw this with LSU last year. Looked very strong in September, October. What were they in November? Nothing special. Kelly's a good coach, but LSU doesn't deserve good. They deserve elite. I mean, Ed Orgeron won a title. Les Miles won a title. And then, of course, we know about Nick Saban. Miles and Orgeron are not as good of coaches as Brian Kelly. And the fact that Kelly has struggled at LSU after having a wonderful year 1 makes me question some things. I'm not a huge fan of Garrett Nussmeier just because of the style of QB he is, combined with his history of turnover issues. Their O-line loses a lot. They bring in guys from the portal. But I think Texas, I think Penn State, I think that many schools would tell you that's a risky strategy. Many of them would. Good wide receiver room, and I think that at linebacker with Harold Perkins and Whit Weeks, and then safety with A.J. Halsey, Tamarcus Cooley, I love a lot of the talent they have, but will it all work out, especially with the pressure they'll be under? I don't think so. At 23rd, we have Tennessee. Losing Nico is not as big of a deal as people think, because the dirty secret is Nico wasn't all that good last year. Peyton Lewis and Deshaun Bishop behind Wendell Moore Jr. or Mo Jr. and Shamurad Umarov, that's going to be another good rushing offense. Not the same as last year, but still good. I like Mike Matthews to break out at wide receiver, and that plus Miles Kitselman will give Joey Aguilar pieces to throw to and run that offense. Their defense, I look to have talent on it still, and Joshua Josephs and Dominic Bailey at edge, and they may have the best cornerback room in America. Jermon McCoy, Ricky Gibson III, Colton Hood, Boo Carter. It's deep, and their starters are proven, talented commodities who should get better and learn some lessons from that Ohio State game. I don't think they're going to reach the playoffs again, but they could. They're undervalued, I think. They're certainly top 25, and I think they'll win 8 or 9 games for sure. At 22nd, we have the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Nebraska, I think, is in a place where they should break out, and in terms of power ratings, I think they will. But their schedule is a little bit tougher than some people let on, just a little bit. And I think more importantly, you have to look at how their team is built. You can't just say, well, it's Matt Rule year 3, and he always does this in year 3. Yes, it's a habit. And yes, this Nebraska team will be, I think, a good chunk better than last year's team and certainly the 2023 team. But think about it. They bring back Dylan Raiola, and him paired with Dana Holgorsen, I think, will make him a top 20, if not top 15 QB for the entire year. I love him at Johnson and how he fits the offense, especially with Justin Evans, Henry Lutovsky, and Rocco Spindler in front of him. And I like Ja'Cory Barney Jr., Dane Key, Neziah Hunter, their receiver room. But then I look at the defense, and I think, who's going to step up at D-line? I look at their linebacker room, and I like it, but is it elite? I don't think so. And their secondary had some issues. And John Butler's only called defense for 1 year in his career. So I think the defense could be a rocky road and will probably be Nebraska's worst under Rule. The offense will offset that by being the best easily. So this team has the potential to be top 20. It has the potential to win 9-10 games and have that year 3 breakout like we've seen. But it could also have that breakout to a more neutered, calmer degree, and they still lose 4 or 5 games because the defense has some issues and they're just not quite there yet. They're a top 25 team. I just don't quite know if they're going to be a playoff contender like Rule's team at Baylor in his 3rd year would have been if the 12-team playoff existed in 19. A little bit of a shocker here, but we have Utah. The Utah Utes, just allow myself to kind of stretch and get back in my chair. I like to move around while talking about this stuff because I'm pretty passionate about it, pretty hyped up. Utah at 21st may shock some of you, but think about it this way. How long do you think that a Kyle Whittingham coach team with Morgan Scaley, with Jason Beck replacing Andy Ludwig, and with the QB as exciting as Devin Dampier, how long do you think a team like that, with the culture that Whittingham's built and the fact that they're one of the more talented teams in the Big 12 by recruiting, and they have a proven developmental process, how long do you think they're going to be down? Last year and the year before, they built their system around Rising. He couldn't play, wasn't nearly as fantastic as he was in 2021 and 2022, and now he's retired from football. I think with a new QB, an exciting QB, a mobile QB, and players they have on defense like Teo Johnson, Lander Barton, and then their O-line, which I think could be the best in America. Jaron Kump, Tanoa Togai, Michael Mokofisi, Caleb Lomu, and Spencer Fano. I love the unit. I think this is a team that is going to find a way to make it to the Big 12 championship game. So if you're Texas Tech, if you're Baylor, Arizona State, you're all competing for one spot because I think Utah is just going to find a way to go there. They're super undervalued. They have a ton of talent, a ton of experience, and you bet that they're going to be mad after last season. At 20th, we have Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a team that I think is a little bit undervalued, but at the same time, I look at their win total of 6.5, and while I think they'll go over that, I also believe that their schedule is just so hard that I don't see this team quite as a playoff contender. They could be top 10 in power rankings, and I will tell you I still would not pick them to go to the playoffs because they play Michigan. They get them early, yes, but Michigan plus Alabama on the road, plus Texas neutral field, plus Tennessee on the road, plus LSU, plus Missouri. We're not even talking about Auburn or Ole Miss or South Carolina. I mean, you have nine games against high-quality opponents. I think all of those teams I just mentioned are ranked in my top 35. Oklahoma plays 75% of their schedules against who I think will be top 35 teams in football, and some of them may be undervalued. So even with Mateer coming in, even with Ott coming in, even with their O-line likely improving based on experience alone, even with an awesome defense that features Dominic Williams, Jaden Jackson, David Stone, Grace Holton at D-tackle, Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie, and Sammy Omosigho at linebacker, and Robert Spears-Jennings and Eli Bowen at DB. I don't think it'll be enough to reach the playoffs. And Brent Venables has not been a push or plus in terms of game management. He has cost them games. And Oklahoma just has not lived up to its talent ranking, to its standard. I'm low on Brent Venables, I confess. But this is a team where after studying their roster, I would not be shocked at all if when I do these rankings, I redo them, if they would be top 15 in power rankings. This team should be good. It should be much better than last year. Doesn't mean they'll have a better record, though, with the schedule. At 19th, we have ASU. ASU I have as the best team in the Big 12 per power ratings. It's one problem, much like Illinois, they won a bunch of close games, and they arguably lost their best player. For Illinois, that was Pat Bryant, and for Arizona State, it was Cam Scatterbo. I don't think they'll replace either of them. It'll have to be more of by a committee thing for Illinois at wide receiver, and then for even more so for Cam Scatterbo at running back. Kanye Udo and Kyson Brown I think will do well there, and I have Leavitt as the best QB in the Big 12. And I like their O-line. I think that Jordan Tyson, if he's healthy, will be the best wide receiver in the Big 12. And they have some good players on defense, like Xavier Alford, CJ Fight, for example, and I love their staff. But winning that many close games implies that you're going to regress the following year, even when you're second in returning production, bringing back 79% of your 2024 production. A team that did have some close wins, many of them, but won the Big 12 and ultimately almost beat Texas in the playoffs. At 18th, we have Louisville. This is another team where they do lose some guys, but because of their head coach in Jeff Brom, he has a proven process. They have a good program. The fact they took Vince Moreau from Kentucky, I think, shows that they are a good program with good standing who can compete for the college football playoff and ACC championships. I love Miller Moss and how he fits the Jeff Brom system. He's a Jeff Brom quarterback. I love their running back room, absolutely, with former freshman Isaac Brown, who's entering his sophomore year. Also have Duke Watson. I think Pete Nigra is the best center in the ACC. Louisville has great wide receivers, including plucking Dakari Collins from NC State, Reen Konga on defense, along with D'Angelo Hutchinson, TJ Quinn, Clev Lubin, Stanquan Clark. They have some good players on defense. They play Clemson, Miami, and SMU. It would not shock me if they beat two of those three teams, and I certainly think they'll beat one of those three. At 17th, we have Florida. This is another team where, like Louisville or even Oklahoma, they can steal some wins. But much like Louisville or Oklahoma because of the schedule, and Louisville because some of their talent limitations, they'll probably also lose some games. Napier is a minus coach. He is, where he will cost them a game that they should arguably win, or maybe it comes in a big game and Florida just gets destroyed. But I think they're a top 20 team because of the experience they have and because of DJ Lagway, who, if healthy, will be a top 5 QB in America this year. I think only behind Lenoris Sellers in the SEC. And unlike Sellers, he has an excellent supporting cast. Jake Slaughter's the best center in football. Florida is going to contend with Texas A&M to have the best O-line in the conference, and Texas as well. I think by the end of the year, Texas' O-line will reload. I love Jaden Baugh and Jacoby Jackson, and on defense, they have a great edge in Tyreek Sapp and an experienced secondary in Jordan Castell, Sharif Denson, Devin Moore, Bryce Thornton, for example, and some other players. This is absolutely a top 20 team, and if DJ Lagway is Cam Newton, like some of my friends and some analysts think, well, this is consequentially an SEC and playoff contender for sure. At 16th, Georgia Tech. This is one where the 7.5 win total and the 4.7 SP Plus ranking, which is 44th, strongly disagrees with my projection. More so the SP Plus rating. I have no problem with the win total because they play Georgia every year, and with Georgia's talent, you almost have to count that preseason as an auto loss from a power rating sense. You don't have to count that as an auto loss when filling out your schedule because Tech under Key punches above their weight class in big games, for sure. I think Haynes King, when healthy, is a top 10 quarterback. I think their O-line will reload. I love Jamal Haynes at running back. And while losing Eric Singleton sucked, I think that Eric Rivers will come close to replacing him. Dean Patterson's another great addition, also from Florida International, and Malik Rutherford comes back. Combine that with Jordan Vandenberg, Akello Stone, and Ronald Triplett on the defensive line, and Matthew Alexander being that third defensive tackle. They don't just have a great O-line, they have a great D-line as well, especially by ACC standards, and that fits with Key's philosophy of game control. So I love this team to be a playoff contender. Wouldn't be surprised if they played in the ACC championship game. At 15th, we have SMU. SMU is only ahead of Georgia Tech because they have more roster talent. That's the only reason why. And because they won more games last year, and Kevin Jennings, I know for a fact, has less injury concern than Haynes King. And if Haynes King is out for Georgia Tech, they can still win games, but they will not be the same team. So SMU just has more stability. I think Tech has a higher ceiling, but also a much lower floor. SMU was, I would say, a missed long field goal from Nolan Hauser from winning the ACC and getting a bye. And they were the second best team in the ACC per power ratings, or the third best. I know they were behind Miami and FPI and around Louisville and FPI, ahead of Clemson still. I think Kevin Jennings, if he can get over some of those turnover issues and that bad game against Penn State where he was totally a deer in the headlights, he'll succeed. PJ Williams is a good tackle. RJ Maryland and Matthew Hibner could be the best 1-2 punch at tight end in America. And they have a sneaky deep D line, and their safeties in Isaiah Nwokobia and Ahmad Moses. That is one of the better safety duos in America. So this team will still be good. They won't go 8-0 in ACC play again, and I would not pick them to repeat in making a playoff appearance, but they'll be a top 20 team that will be a CFB contender under Rhett Lashley. At 14th, I have Missouri. Missouri, wow, talk about winning all your close games. And they played a team in Iowa who usually wins all their close games in the Music City Bowl, but Iowa lost all their close games last year. Missouri is one of those teams where I might have reservations about them when I redo these rankings, and I might rank them lower. But I like Drinkwitz, love Drinkwitz, in fact, and I like what they did in the portal. They are a really good portal team at assessing portal talent, bringing it in, integrating it in their system, and rolling with it. I love Bo Pribula. I love, I know Caden Green and Connor Tollison aren't transfers, but they're some of the best interior offensive linemen in the nation in SEC. And I like bringing in Johnny Williams IV at tackle, Kevin Coleman at wide receiver, and then Damon Wilson. All those guys are from the portal. And then Zion Young, one of the SEC's better edge players, came from Michigan State in the portal entering 2024. Same with Josiah Trotter, not from Michigan State, but another portal addition at linebacker, this time entering 2025. So I love what they have on defense. I like what they have in theory on offense, especially if Pribula pans out, and he looked good at times with Penn State last year. I know Penn State wanted to keep him in the playoffs. They couldn't. Career decision, totally understandable by Pribula. I don't think this team will win 10 games again, but 8 or 9, certainly. I love their over on the 7.5 win total. I think 8 or 9 regular season wins is what will happen. So they could win 10 again, depending on what the postseason looks like for sure. Love their coaching staff and love their team build. They're heading in the right direction. At 13th, we have USC, and the Trojans under Riley have just been getting worse and worse every year in terms of record. But if you look at the power ratings, they were better in 2024 than 2023. They were just a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. Definitely more physical. And with the portal additions they've made, the fact that they've steadied a little bit on recruiting, and with their current recruiting class entering 2026, which isn't for this year, but for the following year, they have a lot of juice. And much like LSU, think about a defensive staff that's a huge upgrade over the prior regime, and they're in year 2, where they will make their biggest impact. I think USC's defense is going to be wicked this year with Eric Gentry, who I have as the best overall linebacker in the Big Ten. I also love their edge players. I love Cameron Fountain. I love Anthony Lucas, Devin Tompkins on the interior. I love that Kamari Ramsey's back, and I think they'll do all right on the O-line. They have a deep running back room, and I expect Maeva to take steps forward compared to where he was last season. I love USC to win 9 or even 10 games this year and be a playoff contender. Same thing with A&M. A&M and USC both have win totals of 7.5. Now, I think they're juiced to the over, so they're projected to go 8-4. I love these teams to at least win 9 games, maybe 10. A&M at 12, when they're top 10 in returning production, when you have Mike Elko and his entire staff in year 2, when Elko is more involved in calling the defense, not because he's desperate like Brent Venables, and that's why Venables is calling the defense, but because he thinks, hey, I can improve this unit. And I don't think he's not under any hot seat pressure. I don't think he's even under much competitive pressure right now. It was year 1. Yes, they went 8-5, but it was better than the last 2 years of the Jimbo Fisher era, and I think people understood that even with a lot of the talent on the roster, it would take at least a year to flesh some things out. I think they're going to take a step forward with Marcel Reed. I have their O-line competing with Florida for the best in the SEC, and that with Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels behind that unit is going to be deadly. Same with bringing in Kevin Concepcion and having Terry Bussey in the program for another year. And their defense, it has talent with Scooby Williams and Tareen York at linebacker, and then you're talking about Marcus Ratcliffe, Will Lee III, and Julian Humphrey at corner. Love A&M this year. Cannot describe how much I love the Aggies in 2025. We have Notre Dame at 11th. Now, I actually have Notre Dame losing to A&M, just a little bit of a sneaky game preview, because we're going to be doing scheduling previews here soon. So you'll see some of my thoughts on team schedules. And when I do my team deep dives, which, by the way, just before we get to our top 10, subscribe and hit the bell so that you get notified when I do team-specific deep dives. All of these teams I'll probably be doing at least a schedule preview video on. Most of them will be doing a deep dive on. Certainly Notre Dame, because I have them as one of the better teams. I have them losing to A&M, but at the end of the year, they'll be better than A&M. The reason why I have them losing that game and why I also have Notre Dame this low is because they lose a lot, and much like Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, or Alabama, if they lost a lot, and they don't, they have to replace a lot of guys, but they don't have the talent profile that those schools do. And they go from Al Golden, who I underrated a lot at DC and who was fantastic in hindsight, to Chris Ash. It's a huge downgrade. And they change stylistically at QB. You're going from almost the ideal scrambling quarterback in Riley Leonard, who had an okay arm, not great, but not terrible. And you're going to see Jay Carter's a lot more upside passing. I think that's why Denbrock is so optimistic about the offense. But he doesn't have the same mobility. And he hasn't played in college football yet because he was injured last year. So I think Notre Dame will start off the year rough, and you will see that carry over throughout their entire season. This is a team to pay attention to for 2026, though, and they still can be a national title contender this year because of their O-line with Ashton Craig, Billy Scruth, and Emil Wagner, and then Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price at running back. I still think C.J. Carr is going to be a good QB. It'll just take him some time to get acclimated, and Malachi Fields is easily their best wide receiver in years. Outside of Leonard Moore and Drake Bowen, I have some questions from on defense, but I think long-term, the program's in a good place. This year is just kind of the calm before the storm of 2026. At 10th, I have Alabama. I'm not buying Alabama's offensive line, but I still think they'll be a top 10 power-rated team because of what they have on defense. On defense, when you have Tim Keenan III, Keon Sabb, when you have Deontay Lawson, I don't know what's not to love about the defense. I mean, Bray Hubbard, Keon Sabb, Zabian Brown, Damani Jackson, and Deshaun Jones, that was a young group last year. And I think with good coaching, they'll be great in 2025. I just look at the offensive line, and I think they lost their best player by a mile in Tyler Booker. Parker Brailsford, I expected more of him last year, somewhat disappointed, but I think he'll be good. They have talent, but they're not quite as deep as, let's say, Texas is at the O-line or Penn State. Still one of the deeper rooms in terms of talent, but I don't like Kaplovich, and more importantly than that, the fact that Ty Simpson is projected to be the starting QB when he couldn't beat out Milroe for those 2 years in a row, that gives me some pause. I think, and this is the case with a lot of teams, actually, I think 2026 is going to be a much stronger year than 2025, and consequently, a lot of these teams that I might seem low on, I'm going to be higher on in a power ranking sense for 2026 overall. That's my situation with Alabama. However, if I'm wrong about the O-line, there's a good chance I am, or if Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer work their magic and Simpson transforms, this is easily a top 5 team. I look at Michigan at 9, and for Michigan, it's the fact that they lose a lot of NFL players. However, in all those positions except for tight end, I don't think the drop-off will be as big as a lot of people think. I mean, Rayshawn Benny graded out as highly as Kenneth Grant last year. Wasn't as good of a player, but he graded out pretty well. And then Damon Payne and Trey Williams coming in from the portal, along with Ike Iwuna and Trey Pierce, who played last year in the rotation, means this D-tackle room is deep. And they return Derek Moore and their second stringers in TJ Guy and Cameron Brand at edge. So I still like this D-line to be one of America's best. Their questions actually relate to where they return the most, as ironic as that is. Because think about it this way. If you have good backups and they return, they don't carry the same amount of returning production as a bad secondary, but you'd rather return good backups on the D-line than questionable DB players who played all last year. And that's kind of Michigan's situation. You know, Rod Moore was good when healthy, but he's coming off a brutal injury. I mean, will he even play? I think he will based on depth chart projections, but I don't think he'll be as good as he was because that injury was pretty bad. And then what about Brandon Hillman? What about Yair Hill? Or I think Yair Hill's pretty damn good, but what about Zeke Berry? And then you look at their O-line, and I think it'll be good, but I don't think it'll be great. I don't think it'll be elite. I think that Penn State and Oregon and even Iowa, Indiana, and Rutgers kind of ace everyone else, Michigan and other teams not mentioned in terms of O-line pedigree. That shouldn't be the case with Michigan, but it also shouldn't be the case with Ohio State too. And both of those units, I think, have some things on the O-line that don't exactly play to that group being a Joe Moore Award caliber unit. I am very high on Underwood, though. Very high on him, similar with Lagway, which is why I have Michigan ranked as high as I do, along with the fact that I think their defense will be top 5. They could be, much like Oklahoma, though, this team that finishes with 3 or more losses, but is power ranked top 10 at the end of the year. Schedule isn't as hard as OU's, but with how young the QB position is and some of the questions they have, they could drop 2 early games, and then they have a tough game against Ohio State at the end of the year and a road trip to USC that'll be tough. At 8th, I have Miami. I think this is a do-or-die year for Miami, not in the sense of Cristobal's job, but in the sense of they've recruited and developed well enough and got the DC hire they wanted to the point where they should win 10 games again, at minimum. Like at this point from here on out, Miami should reload. They should not have to rebuild. And with the 8.5 win total, Vegas is implying they may have to rebuild. I don't think they'll have to rebuild. I think they'll have some growing pains for sure and definitely lose a game that they shouldn't with Cristobal. But if you factor out experience, this is the most talented ACC roster, or one of the most at least. It's up there with Clemson's. And long-term looking, this is the most talented roster in the ACC. Clemson has massive experience over them, and Clemson for now still has more star talent probably, but Miami's out-recruited them recently, and I think Miami's even out-developed them at certain positions. I love Carson Beck. I love Francis Mauigoa at tackle, and I actually think they have some pretty good players on defense, like Mohamed Touré from the portal, Wesley Besaint, who's coming back, Akeem Mesidor's coming back, same with Ruben Bain Jr., and I love a lot of their portal additions in the secondary and Corey Heatherman as a DC overall. The question is Beck healthy? And if he is, does he play more like he was in 2023 or 2024? And how quickly can Heatherman fix the defense? At 7th, I have Indiana. I view Indiana as a top 10 team this year. Yes, it's bold, but I think they'll be better. And I actually have a video talking about that I released. This morning, actually, at the time of this recording. So click the link in the top right corner of your screen if you want a deeper 15, 20-minute analysis as to why I think Indiana will be better in 2025 than they were in 2024. They dominated their schedule. They owned it, outside of Ohio State and Notre Dame, who played for the national championship. They bring in Fernando Mendoza, who has a higher ceiling than Rourke talent-wise. And then they also brought in Roman Hemby, who I think is better than Justice Ellison. And Pat Coogan, I think, will do a good job at center, replacing Mike Caddick, Notre Dame transfer. They return both guards, Drew Evans and Bray Lynch, and tackle Carter Smith, along with wide receivers Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr., defensive tackle Tyreek Tucker, D-end Michael Kamara, who I have as the best in the Big Ten. Their linebackers with Aiden Fisher and Elijah Hardy should be good, and then Amari Farrell at safety, along with Devin Boykin, an incoming transfer, D'Angelo Pons returning, and Jamari Sharp, rotational corner, coming back. Think about what I said about USC and LSU's staff, where in year 2, you typically see the most improvement bear fruit. And that was with their defensive staff. Indiana's entire staff, minus Tino Sinceri, comes back, and they bring back a lot of their experienced veteran players who were with Cignetti at JMU. They should get better, returning 6/10 of their production and most of their staff, and having in another portal class of players that Cignetti and his staff have scouted. I love Indiana entering 2025. Now, they could be worse, and odds say they will be worse record-wise, but I also think the odds would tell you they may improve in power ratings, especially when it comes to playing in big games. At 6th, I have Ohio State. Now, much like I think Utah at 21 to Oklahoma at 20, where you had a big increase in talent and therefore power rating from Utah to Oklahoma, I think going from Indiana to Ohio State, there is another jump. We're jumping into a new tier now here. From here on out, I think all these teams have no argument to be lower than 6th, outside of one team, and that team being Oregon. Ohio State is not higher because of the concerns the staff has on the D-line, and at the same time, the O-line loses its best player in Donovan Jackson. And while, again, it will be a good unit, it will be a good unit collegiately. This same exact unit last year only ran for 5 yards per carry with a mobile QB, with the best wide receiver prospect we've ever seen, and with 2 running backs as good as Kenneth Walker. And they struggled to run the ball in Big Ten play. Now, in the playoff, they fixed some things, but a lot of that was the result of, against Oregon and Tennessee, they got up big using the passing game, and then when Tennessee and Oregon could no longer try to exploit any line of scrimmage advantage, then Ohio State ran to keep them honest, and you get the point. You get the point. Ohio State's strength is their outside. I think in 2026, that'll probably be different because they'll have experience like they did in 2024, where their D-line was much stronger than their outside on the defense. Like their D-line was much stronger than their corners. And in the beginning of the year, the O-line was one of the better ones in the nation. I'm just a little bit cautious about Patricia and Hartline and then what they have in the trenches. And Sayan's a redshirt freshman. Like he is a redshirt freshman, and Ohio State had some concerns about him last year. So I'm a little bit lower on him, just a little bit, than some other teams, but I have actually found myself to be agreeing with the consensus or even a little bit higher than the consensus on Ohio State, at least in terms of where I have them ranked overall. This team will be a threat in the playoffs if they make it, and the odds say that they will. I absolutely love a Ryan Day team in the playoffs. I mean, they just look at 2022 Georgia, look at the 2020 CFP, look at last year's run. I mean, they just prepare for the playoffs like no other, and they have the 2 best players in America. So this is a team that will have a high floor, a high floor and a very, very high ceiling, but their floor is probably lower than a lot of the prior Ohio State teams. At 5th, we have Clemson. This is a team whose floor is extremely high, and whose ceiling is probably even higher than Ohio State's with all they bring back and the talent they have, and the fact they upgraded coordinator and didn't downgrade. This is a unit where, when I redo these rankings, I may have Clemson inside my top 3 or even top 2. Yes, Clemson lost some games last year they didn't have business losing. They shouldn't have lost to South Carolina, and they had no business losing to Louisville especially, but they lost those games. I think Klubnik's the best QB in America, and I think that their wide receiver core with TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco Jr., and Antonio Williams is pretty good. I think it's second in America, only behind Ohio State with Jeremiah Smith. Like, I really believe that. Where I have pause with Clemson is, even though they have TJ Parker and Peter Woods, where I have pause with them is I wonder how good of a DC Allen is. And especially come playoff time or big game time, some of the issues that he had with Penn State last year were the defense against Oregon kind of froze up. I think if Ohio State played a better game on offense, they would have done better against Penn State's defense for sure. I mean, they should have scored 27 or even 34 points, but they didn't. They scored 20. And then also what Penn State had against Notre Dame, where they should have held Notre Dame to the teens, and they didn't. Just didn't. So I question how good Allen is. He's definitely better than Goodwin, but you want someone who's much better than Goodwin if you're going to win a natty. And I think this is a natty or bust year for Clemson. They have to reach the semifinals at minimum, if not the national title game, and play competitively for a title. I think they're one of the best teams in America, so that shouldn't be a problem, but they do have some flaws. Expect this team next time I do these rankings, though, to probably be higher than this, though there's no guarantee. Oregon at 4 is going to weird a lot of people out because Ohio State just dominated them, and they barely escaped Penn State and Indy, and they replace a lot. And they don't quite have the roster talent that Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia do. They're a little bit behind those teams, though by next year they'll match them. I'm higher on Oregon in part because of their youth and because I think the schedule outside of 1 or 2 games actually sets up fairly nicely for them. At the beginning of the year, they have 4 games that should be automatic wins. Doesn't mean they'll be big blowouts, but they have essentially a month to get warmed up. They then travel to Penn State, have a bye, and then host Indiana. And from there on out, every team they play, they should be, a touchdown or more favored against. What I love about Oregon compared to some of these other teams is I think they're stronger on the O-line than Clemson and then Ohio State. Yes, there is some risk there because they bring 3 offensive linemen from the portal, but World and Harkey at tackle graded out exceptionally well. Same with Pregnan at guard. They've recruited about a 50% blue chip ratio there, and they returned center Iapani Lololu, who didn't allow a sack last season. So I like Oregon's O-line. I love Mackay Hughes. I think he's one of the best running backs in America and in the Big Ten. And I think Decorian Moore, he won't be Jeremiah Smith, but I think he'll have a Ryan Williams, if not slightly better type here. Again, won't be Smith because Smith is just an exception to the rule. I'd never pick anyone to be that good. And they have Kenyon Sadiq. It's Kenyon Sadiq and Max Clare for who's the best tight end in America. So the fact that Oregon has that really helps them. Same with Clare with Ohio State. I love Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti. I have Oregon and Ohio State. I view them very similarly. I think that Ohio State will be better on defense because I think Patricia will be better than Lupoy, and I think they're a little bit more talented there. But I also think that Oregon has a more balanced offense than what Ohio State will produce, and I think Oregon is just a little bit better on the D-line. Worse starting D tackles, better starting D ends, better depth overall. And I like game control, and I like line of scrimmage play more than outside play. So that's why I have Oregon a little bit better than Ohio State. I will say, though, that Oregon has a lower floor than Ohio State and probably a lower ceiling. So Ohio State, from a consensus ranking standpoint and just, going off of, purely numbers and blind faith and no projection, Ohio State should be ahead of Oregon. This is just a projection that I'm making because I think Oregon's very undervalued. It's the same thing, by the way, with Georgia. I think Georgia's the most undervalued team in the country. I've been low on the SEC for much of this video, but Georgia I'm very high on. This is a stat from a channel called Bald Father Bets, and he told me this, and you should follow his channel. Just look it up on YouTube, Bald Father Bets. Georgia had 2 games where Carson Beck threw 3 interceptions, and they won by double digits. And the other game, where he threw 3 interceptions, was against Alabama on the road, and they nearly came back and won. That's insane. No other team can do that. No other team has that type of game day coaching and motivational ability and cultural strength to do that. No one does. I mean, think of Texas. Texas didn't even beat a team who finished the year ranked or who finished the year top 10 in FPI. Didn't beat any of those teams. Ohio State had a game against Penn State where they had turnover issues and won by 7. And if Penn State gives the ball to Tyler Warren inside the 5, maybe they win. They had a turnover-filled game against Michigan, who was worse than Florida, way worse than Texas. And even though they beat Alabama, I think they were worse than Alabama. Michigan just won the turnover battle and I think cared about the game more. And they lost to Michigan. And then Oregon, when Oregon had their one bad game where everything fell apart at the wrong time, well, Ohio State destroyed them and could have made the score 60-0 if they really wanted to. So Kirby Smart is the best coach in football with easily a top 3 staff. And if you factor in the head coach more than anything else, which you should, it might be the best staff in the country. I love their O-line. I love their defense. One thing I'll mention about their roster before we run out of time here with Georgia is I think Christian Miller and Xavier McLeod could be the best D-tackle group in America. They have the D-line they want. They have the defensive talent they want. The question is, I think, is surrounding their O-line and QB, and I'm more confident there than a lot of people are. We have Texas at second. Steve Sarkisian's the best roster builder in America. I have Texas pegged with a top 3 staff, much like Georgia and much like the team ahead of Texas, who you probably already know, but we'll save that for a minute from now. I love Arch Manning. I think he's a little overvalued, but I still view him as a top 10 QB and better than Ewers was last year with another preseason of work. Their O-line will start off the year rough, but with how they've recruited there and how they've developed and how they've executed in game, I think they will be like a great unit by the end of the year. Elite, probably not, but great by the end of the year, certainly. I love Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore Jr., Khalil Lockett, and Jack Endries in the receiver positions. And Colin Simmons, best D-end in America. Anthony Hill Jr., best linebacker in America. Michael Taff could be the best safety in America if Caleb Downs didn't exist. Their defense is going to be wicked. And that offense, if Manning is able to hit his ceiling, will be Sark's best. If Texas plays like they did on defense last year and Manning hits his ceiling, this team will likely win it all. But there's a team that has something to say about that, and that's Penn State. Texas, I think, is in a half tier above Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, and Oregon. I think Texas is in a half tier ahead of those teams, but Penn State's in a full tier ahead of all those teams, including Texas. I think Penn State is the nation's best staff, nation's best OC, nation's best DC, one of the best strength and conditioning programs, so a 3-headed monster that I think will compensate for Franklin being a negative in big games. I think their O-line is the best in America with Nick Dawkins, Vega Ione, Cooper Cousins, who I love to break out, and then they have 3 NFL tackles in Drew Shelton, Nolan Rucci, and Anthony Dunco. I also believe they fixed the wide receiver position by bringing in Kyron Hudson, Trevor Pena, and Devontae Ross, and I actually love their D-tackle room. I know some people have been critical of its depth and they're worried about it, but I love the D-tackle room. Edge is a concern with an injury that happened to, his name escapes me, which is unfortunate, but he was going to be their third D-end, and he got hurt. So they do have some depth concerns at edge, but they still have denied Dennis Sutton and Zariah Fisher, who I think will be pretty darn good. I love Tony Roas, Zakee Wheatley, have him as first-team All-Big Ten players at linebacker and safety, respectively. And I think A.J. Harris will be the best overall corner, especially with Jim Knowles being his DC as opposed to Tom Allen. I haven't even brought up Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, Ty Blanding, Xavier Gillum, Alonzo Ford Jr., Caleb Artis, and Zane Durant. Almost forgot their best D-tackle who's an All-American, but I didn't. And then Drew Aller has round 1, pick 1 potential. So I have this team as the number 1 in America, and I think at the end of the year it won't be particularly close because I think their depth is better than their recruiting rankings would tell you. Recruiting rankings are important. It's something I undervalued last year, but there are exceptions to the rule. There are. I mean, Clemson in the mid-2010s before they really got their roster updated was like that. Michigan was like that in 2023, and I think that Penn State's going to be that way this year. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciated your time. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. I will see you all very soon. Have a just absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye.